welcome. Joining us today on Budget Pe Charcha on Times Now is Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist at Bank of Baroda. Thank you very much, Mr. Sabnavis, for joining us here today on Budget Pe Charcha on Times Now. You know, you've said that prudence and not populism will be the underlying theme to build Bharat. But this is another election year with some important states going to polls.
Well, in fact, if you look at the way in which the government has operated the budgets in the last 10 years, irrespective of the external environment, when I talk of external environment, I'm referring to very clearly to the elections which you're talking of. There has been this tendency to ensure that fiscal prudence has been maintained. I think with the exception of the COVID years, which were exceptional, that was the only time when I think fiscal deficit numbers were high. Otherwise, the government has been working relentlessly to reduce the fiscal deficit ratio. And I would tend to believe that this is something which would be done even in the current budget. Last year, notwithstanding the fact that we have seen certain income tax concessions which were given at the time of the budget, and subsequently we have seen that they were which were invoked. And so going ahead, I think we will be moving in the downward trajectory from 4.4% to maybe something around 4.1%.
Okay. So 4.1% of GDP is the target that you're looking at for FY27 that the FM should announce?
Yeah, that's what we're looking at. Though we should keep one thing in mind, that lots of these numbers which are going to be announced may have to be moderated because during the month of February, that is post-announcement of the budget, we're going to have a new GDP series, a new CPI series. So we're not quite sure as to how those numbers will turn out to be. They'll be very much different from what we have in the 2011-12 base, in which case there will be certain modifications. But going by the 2011-12 base year, which is being maintained for GDP, I would tend to believe that we will go down by around 0.2, 0.3% from the revised estimate for 25-26.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sabnavis, amidst the geopolitical uncertainties, what should be the top priorities of Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman when she presents the budget on 1st of February?
So there will be two sets of issues which I think will be quite prominent in terms of what the budget will be doing in light of the tariff issue. One is to provide some kind of support to the export-oriented industries who could be affected on account of the higher tariffs. We have seen that the growth in exports has been fairly uneven and a bit nebulous in the sense that we have seen a lot of front-loading taking place in the earlier months of the year. So therefore, we're not quite clear whether our exports have been affected. But logically, we have seen that industries such as ready-made garments, leather goods, auto components, jewelry are the ones which would have been affected on account of a higher dependency of the US market for exports. So we would be expecting certain measures to be announced by the government, not necessarily in terms of credit guarantee, but also probably in terms of a direct incentive for these export-oriented units, given the fact that most of them would be residing in the MSME space. So I think that is something which we could be expecting. The second is that India has been fairly aggressive in terms of signing MOUs with different countries, and we do believe that there would be one which we'll be having with the US as well as European Union in terms of a free trade treaty, in which case there would be a certain tinkering of customs duties. So rather than income tax, corporate tax, GST, which have already been addressed in the last few budgets, I think the focus would be on customs, and that's something which industry would be eagerly looking forward to see as to what kind of changes to take place in that particular area.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sabnavis, some experts that we have spoken to are of the view that the finance minister should not even think about a further cut in income tax rate for individuals. But then some are of the view that there is still some scope. What do you think?
No, I think a lot has been already done. There may not be much scope given the fact that we saw large concessions being given by the government in the last budget. And it remains to be seen whether that has actually worked in terms of spurring demand. But that was the main reason that they brought about those concessions, which was to involve a loss of revenue of around 1 lakh crores. So I don't think this is the time to do it. Now, it is true that certain sections of people have been affected even today on account of cumulative inflation, which has built in the past. But those people may not really be in the income tax paying bracket. Because if I remember right, the FM had said that with the way in which the tax system was structured, that if you earned up to 12 lakhs, you may probably not be paying any income tax,
Right.
which means that if your income was 12 lakhs, you may not have to pay any tax. So I don't think there is a need for any further rationalization, though as an individual, I would be happy if there was a further rate cut in the tax rates. But I don't think this is something which will be too much pressing for the government. The focus will definitely be more on tackling the issue of prudence, number one, and second, whichever way it's possible to tackle the negative effects of the tariffs which have been imposed last year on India and still seem to be hanging.
Okay. Now, the kind of tax benefits individuals got in the budget announcement that was made last year, it's going to have an impact on the direct tax collection for sure for this year. Then we had the GST's next gen reforms also kicking in just before Diwali. So do you think perhaps the finance minister could also announce some more sources of revenue generation for the government? What can they really be, in your opinion?
See, in 25-26, we have been handicapped by the fact that inflation was low, and that was one of the reasons as to why overall nominal growth in GDP has been much lower than what was projected at the time of the budget. So that is something which is external, something out of the system over which nobody really has any control. So that has partly contributed to the lower growth in tax collections. So going ahead, I think relying a lot on tax collections at this point of time may not be the high priority for the government. They may be looking at alternative sources, as you mentioned. And I think one area which comes to mind is asset monetization, because that is something which has a lot of scope, something which has been explored by the government. And I think there will be a bit more aggression shown when it comes to asset monetization. I'm saying asset monetization, which is quite distinct from disinvestment, because disinvestment is a different kind of an ideology. I think that's not what I think will be the focus on. It will be more in terms of asset monetization. There are lots of assets which are held by the government, which could be monetized in terms of renting, used for different purposes, different charges being put. I think roads, for example, how do you really charge for them? I think the focus will be more on that if we're looking outside the scope of taxation.
Okay. There's also some chatter around wealth tax. What are your thoughts? Should India bring back wealth tax?
No, I'm fundamentally against a wealth tax because wealth is created by people who have already paid their taxes on their income. So at times when there's too much of wealth in the hands of some people, there is this tendency to take on the Piketty argument and say that we should be taxing wealth. But I'm against taxing wealth because wealth is created by people who have already paid all their taxes. Probably you had the acumen, or maybe you have that advantage on the basis of which you have created the wealth. So taxing it again could actually be a deterrent for enterprise. So therefore, I would be against taxing wealth at this point of time. In fact, on the whole, I think the idea is not too good in a country like India, or anywhere for that matter, because merely taxing people because they're rich may not really make sense. If at all we want to do something, you can do it on the income tax front. The main source of funds which helps to create wealth is something which could be taxed. You could be having tax on capital markets or any such thing, but definitely not on assets which have been created on the basis of income which has been earned after paying all the taxes. To my mind, it's not even-handed.
Do you think perhaps at this juncture the government can consider lowering the LTCG rate?
LTCG rate, I think there is a strong reason, there's a strong justification for lowering it. But given the fact that the LTCG was earlier nil for the equity market and mutual funds, now you have brought it to this level of 12.5%.
Right.
I don't think they will be lowering it. But definitely there is need to provide some kind of parity on other instruments, especially deposits, because we have seen that when bank deposits are kept, the deposits are used largely for financing various objectives of the government. Could be the priority sector. A large part of that is also used for investment in government securities. So a lot of good is being done from the use of deposits, because 18% goes as SLR. There's another 40% of lending which goes to priority sector, which actually is in consonance with the government's own targets. So to my mind, spreading the LTCG concept to debt instruments, especially bank deposits, is something which would be very, very logical.
Okay. Some experts are also of the view that the finance minister should also focus on ways to increase employment. Job creation should be her focus as well. In your opinion, what can the government do to support job creation? Perhaps more focus on manufacturing?
Yeah, we should remember that when we are talking in terms of government support for employment, it's not going to be done directly. We did have the internship scheme which the government ran, probably they may be reviewing as to how effective it has been, but that is not a long-term solution. At the end of the day, jobs are created in the private sector, and what the budget does is provides incentives wherever required to push forward growth in different sectors. So as you rightly mentioned, when we are talking of any kind of a push which is given to manufacturing or even services for that matter, any specific sectors, MSMEs for that matter, I think that is something which will help to create jobs. So it's a very, very indirect impact which budgets have on employment. We should not be looking at the budget as being something which is directly going to generate employment. The government can do only so much in terms of filling up the number of vacancies which are there in their own departments. But beyond that, I think it is left to the private sector, to the public sector organizations to take it on. And they will take it on only in case they see visible growth taking place. Now, India's growth prospects look fairly positive, notwithstanding the tariff issue. We're still looking at maybe nominal GDP growth of around 10% in 26-27, in which case, if it's going to translate to good growth, which the budget is also supporting through the right incentives, I think that will be the way in which employment will be generated.
Okay, one last question before we let you go. It's going to be 9th budget of the Finance Minister of FM Nirmala Sitharaman. What is going to be that one message that you will like to give to her, ahead of this budget announcement, and also with the kind of conditions that we are seeing, not just in India, but across the world, and also the Trump factor that we are dealing with on a daily basis?
See, the message would be that maintain the consistency which has been shown in the last 9 budgets of the government. So I think that has been the major hallmark of the government in terms of presenting budgets which are very much consistent, very transparent, very clear in terms of direction. So I think it's very clear that the government is going to move along this particular path, rationalization of rates, making sure that everything is transparent, cutting down on those benefits which we're getting under ATC so far, and so on. So they have these 2 different kinds of income tax structures. They're being very, very transparent when it comes to corporate tax rate, the GST. So I think that is the important part. Transparency and consistency is something which the government has shown, which we would expect that to continue, which would provide the right messages. Because the last thing we want is any kind of confusing messages. And I think the government has ensured that everything is very clear when the budget is announced.
All right, Mr. Madan Sabnavis, thank you very much for joining us here today on Budget Pe Charcha. Always a pleasure to have you on Times Now.
Thank you for having me.